is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello and welcome to Global Business Europe, live from CGTN in London. I'm Jamie Owen.
And I'm Robin Dwyer. Our top stories. Reunited. Double vaccinated passengers from the United States and the EU can now come to the UK without quarantine, except for France. Plus,
boosters for Budapest. Hungary becomes the first country in the EU to allow a third dose coronavirus jab. I'll be live with that story in just a moment.
Our other headlines: Europe's biggest bank more than doubles its profits, helping markets gain ground.
And Belarusian Olympic sprinter Kristina Timanovskaya takes refuge in the Polish embassy in Tokyo after refusing to fly home. Fully vaccinated travellers from the United States and the European Union can now visit the UK without having to quarantine.
The relaxation of rules affects people arriving from countries on the UK's amber list, with France the only exception. Well, let's talk now to our correspondent, Naweed Jabarkil, at Heathrow Airport. Naweed, welcome news for the travel industry. How are people reacting?
Yeah, it's actually a bit busier than it has been throughout the pandemic. We've been coming here reporting on stories, and actually you can hear planes coming and going. Within the arrival halls, lots of emotion. As you can imagine, some people haven't seen friends, relatives in the US and other parts of the European Union, in some cases for over 2 years, 3 years, as we've been finding out. But although there is a lot of optimism that this positive step has been taken, the UK government saying reuniting families was a key reason for it, there is still a lot of uncertainty about travel, and that could spell trouble ahead for the wider sector.
Reunited at last. For the first time in months, people from the US and the EU can now come to the UK without the need to quarantine on arrival. Welcome news for the millions potentially impacted.
We got married during the pandemic, and it's really exciting to come here and spend the whole amount of time with him and his family instead of having to sit by myself for a couple weeks.
So last time I was here was kind of Christmas of 2019. So last year I think was a tough year for a lot of people, a lot of families. And I think we're part of like the first wave of US residents coming in. We're part of the new restrictions being released, which is really exciting.
Very happy, very happy. As you can imagine, coming home after such a long time can be so exciting.
It won't be business as usual, though. Passengers will still need to take a COVID-19 test before departure and another on the second day after arriving. France is currently excluded from the changes, but for London's Heathrow Airport, once the busiest in the world, getting international travel moving again is vital.
Aviation is all about connectivity, and we're a small island nation, we're a trading nation, and yet our air routes have been grounded for the last 18 months. Now, finally, we can start getting back to normal, and in particular connect with the United States, our biggest single trading partner.
The industry says this is a positive move, but it wants things to open up even quicker. Fewer than 1 million passengers passed through Heathrow in June. That's down almost 90% on pre-pandemic levels. Airports and the wider travel sector here want more destinations to have quarantine-free travel when rules are reviewed again this week.
But new watch lists for certain locations will mean travel remains uncertain and likely to put off many people from booking trips. Meanwhile, the economic cost is mounting, with almost 10% of the UK economy dependent on travel and tourism. Chancellor Rishi Sunak is among those pushing for restrictions to ease. But with coronavirus variants previously coming in from abroad and the virus still spreading here, officials say they'll be cautious about moving any quicker.
Naweed, let's talk about the pingdemic. The UK government bowing to business pressure over isolation rules and reprogramming its COVID app to be less sensitive.
Yeah, an interesting change this from the UK government, and clearly reacting to week after week of rising numbers of people having to self-isolate because they've been alerted by an official app, an official health app telling them to do so. The government says now if someone comes into close contact with someone who's tested positive for the virus but they have no symptoms themselves, in the past the way the app worked is if you came into contact for 5 days before the positive test, you would have been notified. They're reducing that now to 2 days. The government says that this is based on, quote, public health advice, and that it doesn't make the app or its guidance any less safe in terms of public health. That's really important to stress. Sajid Javid, the health secretary, said this was also about striking the right balance. And the reason he says that is because businesses have been affected by this quite badly. The latest figures show that almost 700,000 people, 690,000 odd people were pinged by this app telling them to self-isolate, and that's had a huge impact on the economy. It's meant lots of businesses, particularly in the hospitality sector, the other sectors as well, also logistics sector, for example, food industry badly hit by this, and it's something that businesses have been saying for a few weeks now that something needs to be done. It seems that the government has responded now and changed these rules. What that will mean in terms of the impact of the so-called pingdemic and whether it means fewer people will be told to isolate and will be able to get back to work, I think the figures will probably be clear in a few weeks' time. Jamie.
Airport boss is saying for life to return to normal, vaccines are the key. The UK government now apparently looking to expand its jabs programme.
Yeah, this another interesting feature from the UK's government. This has been a question that's been asked time and time again. OK, people are double vaccinated, but how long will that protection last, and what happens with booster jabs? Other countries around Europe are also weighing this up. Here in the UK, it's been reported that the government is now looking at rolling them out as soon as September, early September. It could give a third jab of coronavirus vaccines to people here in the UK. Not everyone, though, only those aged over 50 at the moment. They're thought to be given priority. Up to 2,000 pharmacies being prepared for this rollout across the UK, according to the Daily Telegraph, which first broke the story on Sunday. But that still means about 32 million people eligible for a third booster jab, and it comes hot on the heels of more positive news for the UK's vaccine programme. More than 85 million jabs now given out across the UK. 88% of the population has received, of the adult population has received one dose. More than 72% have received 2 doses. But of course, the pullback and the caveat to that is if so many people are vaccinated, there are calls like those from Heathrow Airport here saying, why isn't more being opened up? Back to you.
Naweed Jabbarkal in Heathrow Airport in London. Thank you.
We heard from Naweed there that the UK was considering offering a third COVID booster jab, and Hungary has become the first country in the EU to do just that. Hungarians can choose to have the booster shot 4 months after they receive their second dose. Our correspondent Penelope Liesch is in a vaccination centre in Budapest. So, Penny, how have people reacted so far? Are people taking it up?
Well, Robin, we're outside this vaccination centre, as you can see, not a lot of people around, and that's because although this is welcome news, it's going to be quite a slow rollout in a way. It's up to people to have individual conversations with their GP or vaccination centre to decide whether they can have a third dose vaccine to then book it in, and also what type of vaccine that will be. Now, all of those decisions are being left to medical professionals. So some people, although they may want a third dose, if their doctor disagrees that they need it, they will not be allowed to have it, and we have heard anecdotally that that is the case. The government, though, has insisted that there's no real priority order and that there is enough vaccines for everyone. It is welcome news, particularly for people who've been worried about their antibody levels. There's been a big push by the Mayor of Budapest for free antibody testing and for the federal government to be offering the third dose vaccines. We saw some research and tests conducted a little while ago by the local government area for those over 60, and it showed that around a quarter of the people tested who'd had Sinopharm unfortunately came back with results that they did not have adequate antibodies. So there has been some concern in the community, particularly from those people who had Sinopharm and Sputnik, which is a very large number, well over 2 million Hungarians, because those were the vaccines first offered here. They were the ones Hungary was able to get quickest, and they chose to buy those vaccines ahead of other EU countries. They were the first ones to purchase them, and it meant that AstraZeneca, Pfizer, other EU-approved vaccines came a little later. So many older and vulnerable people, as well as healthcare healthcare workers have had those 2 specific vaccines, and some do now have concerns about the efficacy of those.
So, Penny, why did the government press ahead with this plan despite this debate over the effectiveness of the third jab?
Well, Robin, some of it does appear to be political pressure, while they've certainly not publicly said that. As we know, as I just mentioned, there's been a very strong campaign run by the Mayor of Budapest, a opposition politician, for these third-dose vaccines to be offered, particularly if people don't have the adequate antibodies. Viktor Orban also originally promised that all Hungarians who got the vaccine would be allowed to travel. Now, that's not the case for those who've had Sputnik and Sinopharm. Unfortunately, the majority of EU countries are not allowing them to come in on vaccine passports. They need to do tests and other things. There are different regulations that are stopping people entering certain countries unless they're considered to be fully vaccinated. So unfortunately, there is a bit of a pushback there as well. So these are some of the reasons the government may have decided to forge ahead with this. They've suffered a lot of criticism from the medical community, though. As you said, there are debates as to whether the third dose vaccine is really necessary and what effect it will have. We've seen 6 medical experts coming together in the last few days, writing a big open letter and a number of guidelines that they think the government should be adopting and giving out to GPs and other medical professionals who are having to make these decisions about third dose vaccines. The guidelines that were given out were given very, very late before this official opening of third dose vaccines at the start of August. It's been said that there really is no rhyme or reason, that it's really doctors just having to make a decision based on their gut as in terms of what vaccine people should be having, one after the other. So these medical experts really wanting some stronger guidance, particularly given to the medical community, and to allow more confidence from the Hungarian community to increase the number of first dose vaccinations as well.
Penelope Eliash in Budapest, thank you.
Well, the UK will begin offering COVID booster jabs to 32 million Brits starting next month. All adults over the age of 50 and people classed as clinically vulnerable will be given the Pfizer booster, irrespective of which vaccine they've had previously. Around 2,000 pharmacies will be rolling out the scheme with the aim of delivering almost 2.5 million third doses a week. Let's talk now to Dr. Richard Stanton, who's a virologist from Cardiff University. Dr. Stanton, welcome. Why are some European countries keen to roll out booster jabs, third vaccinations, while the World Health Organization experts and the US Health Agency, the CDC experts, say there's still no real scientific evidence to suggest that boosters are needed just at the moment? Are these booster jabs pointless?
So it's partly the case that it's not going to hurt. We know that all immune responses begin to drop over time, and that's particularly more of a problem in people who are older. And we also know those people who are older are more likely to get really serious COVID disease. And so partly it's about just making sure that those people who are more vulnerable are definitely protected. It's also a little bit about, it depends what vaccine you had in the first place. You know, we heard there from that story in Hungary that a lot of people there had this Sinopharm vaccine, and potentially the amount of immunity you get and how long that immunity lasts is a little bit lower and a little bit weaker, a bit less long-lived with Sinopharm than we might see with the AstraZeneca and the Pfizer vaccines that have been mainly used in the UK. So I think when you put all those things together, it's at the moment, it's a little bit of a belt and braces approach. Certainly in the UK, where we've had these vaccines that last for a long time, it may be less required. But in places where the vaccines, just Sinopharm, have been used, maybe there's a bit more of a requirement there for it.
Months and months ago, I think we were told that some of these vaccines, like Pfizer, could offer protection that might last for years. I wonder, are booster jabs different to the original jab that we might have received?
So there's been a lot of work done on this, and you know, we're all aware of the virus mutating, and so the companies that developed the original vaccines have been watching the virus mutate and developing newer vaccines that are better matches for the viruses that are circulating at the moment. But I've not seen definitive evidence yet as to what these new boosters might be, whether they will match the new variants or the old variants. And probably it's not the most important point. The most important point really is that what we're trying to do here is to make sure that everyone has a really strong immune response, particularly those patients who maybe didn't respond that well to the vaccine the first time round, particularly elderly people whose vaccine responses may drop a bit more over time compared to younger people. So I think it's not the most important question is whether the vaccine matches the new variants. It's just what is your overall level of antibodies that you have and immune responses.
OK, do we have a sense of how long immunity lasts, and is there a difference depending on which vaccine you've had?
So we know that with the Pfizer and the AstraZeneca, if you look at healthy younger people, those vaccines, those immune responses last for at least a year. We haven't got data beyond that, but certainly up to a year, the immune responses are good. And it is still the case that these vaccines are going to be really good at stopping you getting severely ill, stopping you dying from the virus easily up to a year. What perhaps we don't know is there are some patients or some people who don't develop good responses in the first place. And we know that potentially in older people, those responses may wane a little bit more quickly, they may drop a little bit faster. And it does, as we've said, depend on the vaccine you've had. So I think the AstraZeneca and the Pfizer vaccines we have in the UK, there's really good evidence they're going to give good long-lasting immunity. Some of the other vaccines perhaps drop off a little more quickly.
The World Health Organization says that wealthy countries shouldn't really be focusing on COVID-19 booster jabs, third vaccinations, while large parts of the world still remain unvaccinated, even with a first jab. It's a fair point, isn't it?
Absolutely. And I think this discussion about it goes hand in hand with the discussion about do vaccinate younger people as well, and children too. What's the best way of getting the world back on track? And I think actually, if you look across the whole world, there is a good argument for getting the vaccines that we have to other countries first, to try and limit the production of new variants as well. I think that's a very good argument, a very good discussion that needs to be had around that area for sure.
Dr. Richard Stanton at Cardiff University, thank you very much.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, Deliveroo no more. Why the food delivery group is pondering shutting up shop in Spain.
Search CGTN Europe wherever you get your podcasts to subscribe to The Agenda podcast. The Agenda with me, Stephen Cole, always gets to the heart of the story. Just subscribe today and listen now.
Covering the world from 4 continents. A new horizon. Teams in Beijing, Washington, D.C., Nairobi, and London. Who connect, interact, and inquire to bring you the stories that matter to all. The Link, only on CGTN. Facing the unknown is always difficult. In a world in turmoil, it's easy to lose orientation. But when the storms come, we have to see the possibilities. Reinvent. Find new opportunities. Discover a path forward. CGTN. See the difference.
The world has changed under the pressure of the pandemic. For many of us, life is returning to some kind of normal. As we're adapting to changes in all of our lives, let Global Business Europe be your guide to the new normal. Join us weekdays on CGTN.
Hello, welcome back to Global Business Europe. And a quick reminder, CGTN is available to watch for free on all of the major digital platforms, on Smart TV or online on Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, on YouTube and Dailymotion, CGTN.com and the CGTN app.
London's FTSE is up after Europe's biggest bank, Hsbc, saw profits more than double in the first half of the year. It's been boosted by economic rebounds in its top two markets, the UK and Hong Kong. Well, CGTN's Paul Barber has the story. Paul.
Thank you very much indeed, Robin. Yes, the summer sun is shining on HSBC. It beat expectations and reported pre-tax earnings of $5.1 billion in the second quarter. That brings its profit for the first half of the year to $10.8 billion. It's quite a turnaround from last year when annual profit fell 45% amid global lockdowns. The London-based bank is now cancelling a further $300 million it had set aside to cover loan losses. HSBC is also paying an interim dividend to shareholders worth around $1.4 billion in total. The bank is also doubling down on its pivot to Asia, launching a $6 billion plan to expand there and moving 4 top executives to Hong Kong. Well, the Hang Seng Index there joined other Asian markets in a cracking first day of August trading. It closed up 1%, Shanghai was up nearly 2%, and the Nikkei in Tokyo closed around 1.8% higher. Back here in London, that news from HSBC helped the FTSE 100 rise almost 1%. In Frankfurt, the DAX is up 0.25%, and the CAC 40 in Paris around 1%. The FTSE's mid-cap index climbed 1.4% to a record. That was thanks in part to a takeover deal worth nearly $9 billion. British defence and aerospace supplier Meggitt has agreed to an offer from US firm Parker Hannifin. Meggitt employs more than 9,000 people here in the UK, and Parker says it is committed to being a responsible steward of the company. Investors are happy. Shares in Meggitt soared nearly 60% today. Guys, back to you.
A ban aimed at stopping US investment in some of China's top firms has taken effect. The executive order signed by President Biden in June prohibits US funds from putting cash into 59 Chinese companies, including top names in the telecoms and tech sectors. Telecoms giant Huawei and China's largest chip maker, SMIC, are among those on the list. Investors with existing holdings have a year to find buyers or face possible action from the US Treasury.
Well, let's get more on this and take you live to New York and our correspondent Sarah Walton. Sarah, it's been suggested that the impact of this ban has already been factored into market prices. What's been the response?
Yes, that's right. Analysts here really saying that investors are being given, plenty of time, plenty of warning to divest their holdings. No one should have been waking up, first thing this morning and discovering this as a surprise. The S&P and Dow have removed the companies from their indices. And, the markets today are doing well. The Dow was up about 170 points at one point earlier, setting a new intraday record high. But we shouldn't overlook the fact that this is causing some, disruption. The order bans direct investments in both debt and equity securities, but it also stops Americans from investing in funds that contain Chinese securities within their portfolio. So this is quite wide-ranging. As you say, investors have got a year to divest. I mean, they don't have to sell, though. They could hold on to them, but after that year, they would then need permission from the US Treasury, essentially, to sell them. And of course, that makes things more difficult. It puts investors in that, awkward situation of trying to decide if they hold on to them or if they get rid of them before that year deadline and, potentially lose money on them doing that. And of course, all this, comes after what has been a really, turbulent few months for Chinese listed, particularly US listed Chinese tech stocks following increased scrutiny on the tech sector in China. That's led to about 770 billion being wiped off US listed Chinese stocks in the last 5 months. So all of this is kind of coming together to create a pretty, turbulent atmosphere for Chinese stocks listed in the US.
What has the US regulator had to say?
Well, July was a pretty as I said, turbulent month for the markets here in the US. Some of that is down to the ongoing concern about what the Delta variant of COVID-19 is going to mean for the economy here. But that increased scrutiny on the Chinese tech sector that I mentioned a second ago, that is also coming into play here and really giving investors some concern about what that scrutiny could mean going forward. The US stocks did hang on to their gains for the month of July, but we did have that big sell-off on the 18th where the Dow fell 700 points. So the Securities and Exchange Commission, the regulator here, I think looking for some reassurance going forward, trying to create a calmer atmosphere. So on Friday we heard from Gary Gensler, who's the chair of the SEC. And what he says he wants is for Chinese companies to disclose, I'm just going to quote this, uncertainty about future actions by the government of China that could significantly affect the operating company's financial performance. And companies would have to do that before they would be allowed to be listed in the US. So, at the SEC, they're looking, I think, for some reassurance, trying to give investors some confidence in putting their money into Chinese tech stocks, particularly going forward.
Beijing has called for further dialogue on this. What might the response in Washington be?
Yeah, that's right. The Chinese Security Regulatory Commission, says it has taken note of what the SEC was calling for that I mentioned just a minute ago, that greater disclosure for Chinese companies before they would be allowed to list in the US. And what it said is that the two countries need to work together on this one. It's saying they should uphold the spirit of mutual respect and strengthen communication on this issue. Now, as to reaction from Washington, that's an interesting one. From a market's point of view, anything that can help stabilise the atmosphere to, give some confidence, that idea of cooperation and working together is something they would want to see. I think that's why we saw that statement from Gary Gensler. But Joe Biden has really continued this more hawkish approach to the relationship with China that we saw grow really under Donald Trump, both economically and politically. So, we are yet to hear directly from the White House about this.
Sarah Walton in New York, thank you very much.
Digital payments app Square, founded by Twitter CEO Jack Dorsey, has agreed to take over the Australian online firm Afterpay. The $29 billion deal is the biggest ever buyout in Australia. Afterpay is a buy now, pay later service that launched in 2014 and has more than 16 million customers worldwide. The industry has seen significant growth as the pandemic led to a massive shift to shopping online.
US airline JetBlue will be launching low-cost flights between London and New York from next week. The transatlantic route will start with a small Airbus plane from Heathrow Airport with one daily return flight before expanding in September.
Hollywood's Sunset Studios is planning to expand production into the UK at a site north of London. The company, which produced La La Land and Zoolander, will build a large studio complex in rural Hertfordshire. It's expected to create more than 4,500 jobs.
The UK-based food delivery group Deliveroo is considering pulling out of Spain, citing limited market share and a disproportionate level of investment needed to remain competitive. This all comes after the Spanish government introduced a labour law that requires on-demand platforms to hire their couriers as salaried staff. It's the first country in Europe to bring in such legislation. Rahul Pathak reports now from Madrid.
It's lunchtime in Madrid, and Glovo rider Julio Cesar is on the move. Julio is one of Glovo's 13,000 food delivery riders based in Spain. The work is hard, the hours are long, and during the height of the pandemic, it carried a high element of risk to their health. But throughout the lockdown, the riders were out on the streets delivering food, whilst the public were confined to their homes. Now, the Spanish government says it wants to protect the rights of these food delivery riders, so they've announced a plan that will make them employees of companies like Deliveroo, Uber Eats and Glovo, and that'll mean they'll be entitled to things like paid holidays and sick pay. It will mean extra costs for the delivery companies, and for riders like Julio, those extra costs will eventually affect him and his fellow riders.
It will affect our incomes for sure. We'll be having extensive shifts, but we won't see the effect of that in our payroll. We'll work more and earn less for sure. That's why I say this will slow us down.
Spain's ruling socialist coalition says the legislation, the first of its kind in the EU, is designed to crack down on the so-called gig economy, which relies on hundreds of thousands of independent workers for app-based services such as food delivery or car rides.
The government has a strict way of looking at this. They're not open to listening, working with the platforms and finding a solution, which for us is looking for a way of maintaining flexibilities but giving the workers more social rights.
The status of those working in the so-called gig economy is a question that's being discussed all over Europe and not just in Spain. Britain's Supreme Court ruling that Uber drivers were workers and not independent contractors.
It looks like there will be a domino effect, and shortly other countries in the EU will make the similar decisions as the ones made by the Spanish government, with the council and support of the unions.
For riders like Julio, even though they welcome the extra job security the new legislation is supposed to give them, many will be reluctant to lose the freedom and flexibility that they currently enjoy. Rahul Pathak, CGTN, Madrid.
After more than a year of devastating financial losses, the global cruise industry is slowly coming back to life. International journeys from England are now allowed to resume after a 16-month enforced break. I spoke to Jamie Katz, a senior equity analyst at Morningstar in Chicago, about the pandemic's impact on the industry.
I think when we look at the cruise industry, what is really interesting is that it was the only travel industry that was completely shut down for a period of time. Hotels were still open, planes were still flying, so there was a disproportionate impact on the cruise industry from COVID-19, and I think that we see that that's still lingering by that graduated return to sailing that we see right now.
So as you say, that is still lingering. How can the cruise industry turn those losses around?
So the cruise industry has worked pretty hard in assessing and implementing what might be the best way to resume cruising without having a material outbreak on the ships. And I think, as you've seen probably across multiple news outlets in recent weeks, there have been isolated incidents where COVID cases have been found, and they've been able to take those cases off the ship, whether they were symptomatic or asymptomatic, trace who those people were with, and be able to get those passengers home safely on private planes or private boats. And that way, the risk of spreading to other passengers by other venues has been really mitigated.
But obviously that fear will still exist amongst potential customers that there could be an outbreak and then everything that will follow on from that. So what can cruise operators do to counteract that?
I think part of what they're doing is trying to make the ships cleaner all around, right? So different air filtration systems, fewer people touching items, maybe lower capacity in theaters for the current time, lower capacity at activities, a certain number of people or constraints in the spa environment. And in doing that, they're better able to control how many people are really touching different points on the ship and taking the time to properly clean them after they're being used, so that there is a minimization of the spread of any virus that potentially slips onto the ships.
And obviously the cruise industry will look a little different going forward. What's the future for it amid these new constraints and constantly changing rules?
So I think flexibility is going to be key here. And I think at least domestically, we've seen the cruise industry has had to navigate some changing state legislation, changing federal legislation, government oversights, and of course, that varies by country globally. So I think, we're going to see pretty consistent changes throughout as we get more information and knowledge and best ways how to handle this and how to handle different variants, and having some flexibility or slack in the operational system to do that is going to be something I think we'll see more of ahead.
And obviously COVID, the big challenge, but other challenges ahead too for the cruise industry, such as environmental concerns.
That's true. And environmental concerns have been something that have been addressed by the cruise industry for an extended period of time. Obviously, there have been different sulfur byproduct rules that they've had to follow by different maritime laws that have changed over time. And so I think the cruise industry tries to adapt as best as it can. There is always going to be some energy burn, whether that's by a battery down the road or some other more green source. And so doing that in the safest and most efficient way is probably how we're going to be moving forward from a lot of these operators.
So will the industry bounce back, do you think? Do you think that people will still want to go cruising?
I think the demand is still there. We're still seeing, bookings that are pretty positive. I don't think cruisers are assuming that COVID is going to be a perpetual virus that is not going to be managed. So people do want to get out and travel. We've seen the TSA numbers, at least domestically, hold up pretty well, despite the fact that the Delta variant is spreading over here. And so I think, there is still a lot of interest in traveling different ways, including on cruise ships. And so I don't think that this is going to permanently damage the potential for the industry.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, wildfires in Turkey's tourist beach towns that desperately needed visitors to return after lockdown.
The EU's digital COVID certificate, which offers the promise of unlocking hassle-free travel around Europe this summer.
In less than 2 weeks' time, the Czech border will also open to all EU and Serbian citizens. 4.4 million Hungarians received their first dose of COVID vaccine.
18 and over can receive a COVID-19 vaccination, but it does come with conditions.
Third wave will probably take longer to emerge. This vaccination centre is part of a massive effort to try and drive down the numbers of the new variant that was first identified in India.
On the agenda with me, Stephen Cole, we look up into space. We look down into data. We look at debt. We look at politics. We look at opioids, climate change. We look at all the issues that really matter around the world. But you matter too. We want to tell the stories you want to see and hear about. Make it your agenda.
We can try out the wild and crazy ideas.
Nothing can stop an idea whose time is coming. This idea is coming.
I actually feel quite comfortable in isolation.
We should all be very busy when we're trying to save the world.
Oh, no!
We hope it will happen. We have to live in hope.
The agreement is signed. But what is the real deal now the UK has left the EU? For trade, for business, for the city, for ordinary people. Make sense of Brexit with CGTN.
Hello, welcome back to Global Business Europe with Jamie Owen and Robin Dwyer. Our top stories. Reunited, double vaccinated passengers from the United States and the EU can now come to the UK without quarantine, except for France.
Hsbc, Europe's biggest bank, more than doubles its profits, helping markets gain ground.
And a ban aimed at stopping US investment in some of China's top companies takes effect.
A sprinter from Belarus is making headlines at the Tokyo Olympics, and not for her athletic prowess. Kristina Timanovskaya refused to get on a flight home. Poland has now granted her a humanitarian visa. Well, our correspondent Tony Waterman is following the story from Brussels. So, Tony, what's the background here? Why did she refuse to fly home?
Well, Robin, Tymynouskaya told Japanese officials when she was at the airport on Saturday that she was being forced to leave the country against her will. And given the backlash and repression that we've seen of dissidents in Belarus since last August's disputed presidential election, these authorities took it very seriously. They put her up in a police-protected hotel room for the night. And as you mentioned, she now has this humanitarian visa for Poland. This is a dispute that stems from an Instagram post that she had made in which she criticized Belarusian coaches for entering her into the 4x400 meter relay race, which she was not told about, which she says is an event that she has never run before. And she said it was because other athletes had not submitted to enough drugs tests. So after that post, she was told that she was going to be withdrawn from competition. She was expected to compete again today, and that she had to pack her bags and go to the airport. The Belarusian Olympic Committee, which is headed up by President Lukashenko's son, said that the coaches decided to remove her from competition based on doctors' advice over her mental state and her emotional state. But certainly this coming against the backdrop of increased crackdown on anybody that speaks out against the government in Belarus. There was some athletes that were arrested as part of those peaceful protests that we saw last fall, including the country's star basketball player and former Olympian herself. And then more recently, we have seen raids on hundreds and hundreds of apartments and offices of activists and journalists. And of course, there was that May event when the Belarusian authorities allegedly forced the grounding of a Ryanair flight so that they could arrest a dissident journalist, Roman Patsevich. So the concern for her was for her safety, that she perhaps would have been subject to the same fate if she had gone back to Belarus.
So, Tony, what's the reaction to this been?
Well, there has been outrage and shock over this, and it wasn't just Poland that offered her asylum. Also, the Czech Republic and Slovenia extended that option to her as well. The EU has come out. They see this, of course, as another backsliding on democracy. Josep Borrell, the High Representative, his spokesperson, said today to Reuters that this was another example of Belarus's brutal repression. And, of course, this taking place at an event, the Olympics, which is about building a better and more peaceful world, and they expressed full solidarity with her and commended the fact that multiple EU countries stepped forward offering her this type of asylum. But for her, she is going to now be going to Poland. And reportedly, that ticket has already been bought, but her concern right now, she says, is about her family that is left behind in Belarus. Her husband, who is also an athlete, he has already fled to Kiev in the Ukraine. And in an interview that he did earlier today, he said, you know, we're just sports people. We are not interested in the opposition movement. But right now it seems as if Tymynouskaya and also her husband perhaps caught up in this, even though they don't necessarily want to be there.
OK, Tony Waterman, thanks very much.
Well, back to the competition and day 10 of the Tokyo Olympic Games. Let's take a look at the medal table. China continues to lead with 29 goals, 17 silvers and 16 bronze. The United States sits second with 22 goals, and host nation Japan in third place, followed by Australia and the Russian Olympic Committee. John Matthew has the day's highlights from Tokyo.
China's gold medal lead is opening with the U.S. at 29-22, with host country Japan still stalled at 17. But it wasn't all roses. The badminton course didn't offer the same goals they did on Sunday. Denmark's Victor Axelsen got a drop shot past Chen-Long to win gold in the men's singles, and Indonesia earned its first Tokyo 2020 gold and its first in women's doubles. But China scored 5 golds for the day, 4 of them in just 45 minutes of competition. That includes back-to-back golds in women's weightlifting. Wang Zhouyu and Li Wenwen took these top spots in the 87-kilogram and over 87-kilogram categories. Li Wenwen would triumph over New Zealand's Laurel Hubbard, the first transgender athlete to compete in the Olympics. John Matthews, CGTN, Tokyo.
And later in the show, we'll bring you some heartwarming stories of Olympic success, including the 18-year-old Tunisian who's stunned with his performance in the pool after a disappointing showing earlier in the Games. That's coming up.
Portugal is easing pandemic restrictions as it ramps up its vaccination drive, with more than half the population now double jabbed. It's part of a new three-stage plan by the government aimed at getting the country back to something approaching normality. Mia Alberti reports from Lisbon.
Portugal has its eye on the end of the pandemic. With more than half of its population fully vaccinated, the first restrictions were lifted on Monday, meaning that the night curfews were lifted, restaurants and bars are allowed to close later at 2 a.m., and most of the venues that were closed so far are now allowed to reopen. That's the case for sports stadiums, casinos and gyms. Virtually the only thing that remains closed are nightclubs. However, some rules are still in place. You have to wear a mask in most places, and you have to present a digital vaccine certificate or a negative test to enter a restaurant on weekends. The second phase of this plan is due to happen in September, when experts expect 70% of people to be fully vaccinated. Then we'll see venues' capacities extended. And then the final Freedom Day, or the final phase of this plan, is due to happen by October, when 85% of people are expected to be fully vaccinated. And then we'll see nightclubs allowed to reopen for the first time in a year and a half, and most of the restrictions lifted across the country. The government says this progress is due to an acceleration in vaccination to fight the Delta variant, and it seems to be working. The number of cases is stable, and 500,000 people are getting vaccinated every week. So all eyes are on that coveted prize of achieving complete freedom by the end of the summer. Mia Alberti, CGTN, in Lisbon.
Wildfires have killed at least 8 people in Turkey as emergency crews continue to battle huge blazes near coastal resorts. These are the latest pictures from Marmaris, where firefighters are struggling in extreme heat to contain the fire, the temperature reaching 43 degrees Celsius. Hundreds of residents and holidaymakers have been moved from the area over the last couple of days. As Mikhail Bar-David now reports, neighbouring towns are preparing for the worst.
Intense efforts to contain wildfires raging in Turkey's southern provinces dominated the weekend. As fires ravaged through several towns in Antalya's Manavgat district, Turks living in forest towns in other parts of the city were feeling the heat as well. Beycik is one such town, located on the foothills of Mount Olympus. Residential areas here are surrounded by forest, heightening their beauty but also increasing their risk during wildfire season.
This road is the only one that leads up to the town of Beycik. It's a curvy road with trees on both sides as you drive up to the town center and up the mountain. If this road is shut down, there is no other escape route for the locals living in Beycik.
Beycik local Sami Göktürk is a retired chief firefighter. Like many residents of this town, he's feeling uneasy.
We're not at ease. We're waiting anxiously. The wind is intensifying, then calming down. It's making us uncomfortable. We're contemplating how we will battle a fire if we come across a spark.
Meanwhile, residents such as Stephanie, a German woman who has been living here for over 3 years, are taking steps to limit their risk while preparing to evacuate if the time comes.
We decide to clean around and to put every dry branches or whatever to remove them. I, for example, have many animals. In a case that we have to escape, I prepared now boxes to put them inside so that we can drive away, for example.
The town manager also called a meeting to address the threat. He advised locals to avoid entering forests and banned picnics and barbecues, as well as smoking in the town's forests. The Beycik locals have also set up meeting points, an observation location, and an online group to stay alert in case the Antalya fires hit this town as well. Mikhail Bar-David, CGTN, Antalya, Turkey.
Top diplomats from Southeast Asian nations are trying to appoint a special envoy to Myanmar. ASEAN foreign ministers hope a representative can help deal with the political crisis and violence, as well as spiralling coronavirus. The 10-nation bloc, of which Myanmar is a member state, has faced criticism for doing too little to resolve conflicts. The appointment has yet to be agreed.
The death toll from floods in China last month has now risen to at least 302 people. Officials say dozens of people are still missing as search efforts continue. Most of the casualties are from the city of Zhengzhou, where record rain dumped a year's worth of rain in just 3 days.
China is battling its biggest COVID-19 outbreak this year. More than 380 people have been infected since the Delta variant was first detected 2 weeks ago among cleaners at a busy airport in East China. The government's imposed fresh travel restrictions and is testing millions.
Israel's top court says 4 Palestinian families facing forced eviction from Israeli settlers in the neighborhood of Sheikh Jarrah can stay if they pay rent to Jewish settlers. The families have been offered status as protected tenants who cannot be evicted. More than 500 Palestinians are facing expulsion from the area in occupied East Jerusalem, which the United Nations says may be a war crime.
US forces in Afghanistan are ramping up airstrikes against the Taliban as militants advance on key cities. Reports in the American press say that in the past 72 hours, Taliban positions around the cities of Herat, Kandahar and Lashkar have been targeted. The country's president, Ashraf Ghani, has blamed the abrupt withdrawal of NATO forces for the worsening security situation.
Iran has warned it will respond firmly to any threat over the attack of an Israeli-managed tanker off the coast of Oman. The United States, Israel and the UK have blamed Tehran for the drone attack. Iran has denied any involvement in the attack, in which 2 crew members were killed. The UK and Iran have summoned each other's diplomats over the incident.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, making a splash. The Tunisian who won gold swimming out of the deep end.
Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there. To see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you. All around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London, China Global Television Network. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference.
Mari, what would you say is a good question?
Stephen, I'd say it's one where there's always more than one answer.
The Answers Project is a new podcast series from CGTN Europe. With me, Stephen Cole.
And me, Mari Beveridge. In each episode, we'll take a complex question.
And with the help of some of the world's foremost experts, shine light on some of the answers. So join us for The Answers Project.
Available wherever you get your podcasts.
Hello, welcome back to Global Business Europe.
For some, they are rare artworks and the centrepiece of Europe's biggest museums. For others, they're painful reminders of colonialism and exploitation.
Now, Germany has become the latest country to return precious antiquities to their place of origin. Trent Murray reports now from Berlin.
Well, this is the Humboldt Forum, an $800 million museum which has just opened here in the historic centre of Berlin. But this colossal project has been controversial on several fronts. Firstly, it sits on the site of the former East German Parliament, which was demolished to make way for this new project. And as for the design, well, you could be mistaken for thinking that this is a seat of power for some sort of royal family. And that's because the building largely is a replica of a Prussian palace which sat here for hundreds of years before being lost to Allied bombing in World War II. But it's what was meant to be inside this place that's become the real flashpoint, particularly for Germany's relations with Africa. The museum had planned to display the Benin bronzes, ancient sculptures that once decorated the former Kingdom of Benin, an area which is now southern Nigeria. But that, as you might imagine, has been hugely controversial. That's because the artefacts were stolen by British soldiers in the late 19th century, brought back to Europe and then sold off to various European and North American museums. And while Germany has held on to theirs ever since, activists have long said it's time to give them back. Despite some initial pushback, years of campaigning and calls between Abuja and Berlin has paid off and has finally seen an agreement on restitution of the ancient antiquities. Authorities here say the official restitution process will begin next year, and it is expected that some of the sculptures will be housed in a new museum in Benin City. But there are questions about whether the whole collection will be sent home or just a few items. But it still is a significant step, one for Germany in particular, who's been forced to confront its role in colonialism and exploitation, as well as for other countries, including the UK, as pressure builds on them to return the ancient relics to their rightful home. Trent Murray, CGTN, Berlin.
Well, as with most Olympics, Tokyo 2020 has provided its fair share of shocks and surprises.
And Tunisia's Ahmed Hafnaoui has done just that. The 18-year-old stunned the world by winning a gold medal in the men's 400-metre freestyle. CGTN's Dan Williams reports.
Ahmed Hafnaoui is one of the stories of the Olympic Games. The slowest qualifier for the final of the men's 400-metre freestyle, the 18-year-old Tunisian shocked the field to win gold, and with a personal best that was 6 seconds faster than his best time at the beginning of the year.
I was happy, I was surprised, and it's pride for me and for the people of Tunisia. It's hard work, it's all hard work pays off. We worked hard all the year, and that's the result.
Hafnaoui's final 50-metre push saw him overhaul Australian Jack McLaughlin. He hopes his achievement will give motivation to others from Tunisia to follow in his footsteps.
It means a dream. It becomes true. I've listened to the national anthem and in the background and the swimming Olympic pool, and it's pride for me. I think it inspires many of the young athletes. I'm happy for that.
At 18, Hafnaoui became the youngest Tunisian athlete to qualify for the Olympics, and he's already eyeing world record attempts and further Olympic medals at Paris 2024 and beyond. Dan Williams, CGTN, Tokyo.
The headlines again. Reunited, double-vaccinated passengers from the United States and the EU can now come to the UK without quarantine, except for France.
Our other headlines: Hsbc, Europe's biggest bank, more than doubles its profits, helping markets gain ground.
And Belarusian Olympic sprinter Kristina Timanovskaya takes refuge in the Polish embassy in Tokyo after refusing to fly home.
And that's it for Global Business Europe. Thank you for watching.
More on all our stories at europe.cgtn.com, and do follow CGTN Europe on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram. We're on smart TV apps such as Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, YouTube and Dailymotion, CGTN.com and the CGTN app.
Coming up next on CGTN, it's Africa Live. We'll see you again tomorrow, same time, same place. From all of the team in London, it's goodbye.
Goodbye.